I texted my family feeling sad that no one remembered my birthday. My daughter replied, "We need space from you. Please don't reach out anymore." Her husband even liked the message. So I blocked them, along with their access to the family fortune they'd been living off. The next day, 99 saw missed calls. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The silence was the first thing I noticed. It had a physical presence in my house, a weight that settled over the minimalist furniture and polished concrete floors, absorbing the light that poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls. My home, a place I had meticulously designed to be a sanctuary of peace on the shores of Lake Norman, had become an echo chamber for my own solitude. Today of all days, the silence was a deafening roar. It was my 60th birthday. I sat in the main living area, a cup of oolong tea growing cold in my hands, and watched the water outside. The surface of the lake was a sheet of hammered silver under the cool October sky. 60. It was a number that felt both monumental and utterly irrelevant. In my mind, I was still the 30-year-old biochemist, fueled by lukewarm coffee and sheer audacity, sketching out molecular structures on a napkin in a cramped university lab. The woman who had founded Origin Biosciences, who had revolutionized dermatological science with a line of patented cellular repair agents, felt like a character I had once played. The woman who sat here now, Dr. Thea Grant, the retired titan of industry, felt like a ghost haunting her own success. My gaze drifted to the mantelpiece. Amidst the awards, the gleaming silver beakers and crystal plaques, was a single framed photograph. My daughter, Morgan. The picture was from her college graduation, her smile wide and genuine, her eyes full of a light that I hadn't seen in years. She was my greatest achievement, my most complex and confounding variable. I had built an empire, but the only thing I had ever truly wanted was to build a happy life for her. The house was a testament to that desire. Every beam, every pane of glass, was a product of a life spent in relentless pursuit of a security I had never known as a child. I was raised in a small cramped house in Greensboro by a mother who worked 2 jobs and still had to choose between paying the electric bill and buying new shoes for school. My brilliance was my only inheritance, my ambition the only fuel I had. I had promised myself that my child would never know that kind of want, that kind of fear. And she never had. I had succeeded beyond my wildest imaginings. Morgan had been swaddled in the finest linens, educated at the best schools, and launched into an adult life cushioned by a fortune so vast it was practically an abstraction. I had given her a world without sharp edges, and now, as the silence of my 60th birthday pressed in on me, I began to wonder if I had, in my loving, misguided effort, simply created a world without any feeling at all. I checked my phone. It was 11:30 a.m. The screen was dark. No calls, no texts, not from her. I had spoken to her a week ago. A brief, pleasant call about the weather and the charity gala she and her husband Lance had attended. I had reminded her then, gently. The big 60 is next week. Don't feel you have to do anything big, sweetheart. Just a call would be lovely. Of course, Mom, she had chirped, her voice as smooth and frictionless as ever. We wouldn't miss it. Apparently they had. I thought of my late husband Charles. He had been a history professor, a man of books and quiet contemplation, and he had been my anchor. For my 50th birthday he had thrown a surprise party that was still the talk of our social circle, flying in friends from all over the world. He understood me in a way I'm not sure Morgan ever could. He knew that my quiet exterior masked a deep need to be seen, to be celebrated, not for my fortune but for myself. After he died, the silence in the house had been one of grief. Now it was a silence of neglect, and I wasn't sure which was worse. I stood up and walked through the house, my bare feet silent on the cool floor. I passed my office, the glass walls revealing the command center from which I had once run my empire. It was all dormant now. The life I had poured into Origin, the passion, the fire, I had given it all up 5 years ago to spend more time with my family, to be a mother, and I had hoped a grandmother. But the grandchildren hadn't come, and my daughter, it seemed, had less time for me than ever. The irony was so bitter it was almost a physical taste. I had traded my boardroom for this beautiful empty house. I had traded the respect of an entire industry for the silence of my own child. And as the minutes of my milestone birthday ticked by, one after another in an unbroken silent chain, a question began to form in the precise analytical part of my mind. The part that had always sought the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. Was this love? Or was it just a long, quiet, and very expensive transaction that had finally run its course? By mid-afternoon, the house felt like a luxury prison. I had tried to busy myself reorganizing a bookshelf, answering a few long overdue emails from charitable foundations. But my focus was fractured, my attention tethered to the silent dark screen of my phone. Each passing hour felt like a small personal failure. Around 2:00 p.m., the phone finally buzzed. A sharp, hopeful vibration against the marble of my kitchen island. My heart performed a ridiculous youthful leap. I snatched it up, a smile already forming on my lips. Finally, the screen lit up. It was a text from an old colleague, Dr. Aris Thorne, my head of research before I retired. Happy 60th, Althea. I hope you're celebrating in style. The team sends their love. We're still trying to crack that new peptide sequence. Could have used your brain in the lab today. The message was warm and genuine, but it felt like a splash of cold water. I stared at the words, the smile fading from my face. Of course, Aris remembered. We had spent a decade in the trenches together, fueled by a shared passion for discovery. My birthday was in her calendar because our professional relationship had been built on mutual respect and a genuine human connection, the kind of connection that apparently was now absent from my own family. I typed back a polite, cheerful reply, my thumbs moving with a practiced ease that belied the hollow ache in my chest. Thank you, Aris. Tell the team I miss them, and try cross-referencing the sequence with a marine enzyme base. There might be a parallel. Even in my distraction, a part of my mind was still in the lab. The afternoon became a slow, agonizing drip of similar interactions. An email from my wealth manager with the subject line Q3 Portfolio Review arrived with an almost comical lack of sentiment. I opened it out of a grim sense of obligation. The numbers were, as always, excellent. The report was a detailed testament to my success, a clinical summary of my fortune. I scrolled through the pages, my eyes catching the line items for the trust funds. Morgan Cooper Personal Trust, quarterly disbursement, $250,000. Lance Cooper Investment Portfolio, current valuation $118.4 million. I stared at the figures, $250,000, deposited into her account, just last month. A portfolio of nearly $20 million that her husband was free to manage. A euphemism for playing high-risk games with my money. I saw the statements for the supplementary credit cards. The charges from the last month alone were staggering. Thousands at designer boutiques in South Park. A long weekend at a 5-star resort in Napa. A single dinner at a Charlotte steakhouse that cost more than my first car. Seeing the raw data, the clinical proof of their lifestyle laid bare in black and white, juxtaposed against the profound emotional silence of the day, was jarring. It was like reading a patient's chart that showed perfect vital signs while the patient themselves was cold and unresponsive. The numbers said our relationship was thriving, a constant healthy flow of resources. But the reality, the human element, was flatlining. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a notification from a social media app, one I rarely used. A cousin from my mother's side had tagged me in a post. A grainy old photo of me as a little girl with a gap-toothed grin, wearing a paper birthday hat. The caption read, Happy 60th to my brilliant cousin Althea. Still the smartest person I know. Love you. A wave of unexpected emotion washed over me. This cousin, someone I hadn't seen in 5 years, had remembered. She had taken the time to dig up an old photo, to share a memory, to reach out. I felt a tear prick my eye. The kindness of a distant relative was a balm, but it also sharpened the sting of the silence from my own child. I forced myself to reply to the messages from friends and former colleagues that trickled in throughout the afternoon. Each happy birthday was a small, painful reminder of the one message I truly wanted to see. Each one required me to perform a charade of happiness, to type back cheerful thank yous while my heart felt like a lead weight in my chest. I was becoming exhausted by the effort of pretending everything was fine. By 5:00 p.m., the sun was beginning its descent, painting the surface of the lake in fiery strokes of orange and pink. The beauty of it felt like a mockery. Another buzz. My finger trembled as I looked at the screen. It was an alert from a news app. Origin Biosciences. AGN stock up 8% on positive Q3 earnings report. Even my company, the child of my intellect, was having a better day than I was. I laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound that echoed in the empty room. It was the laugh of a woman who was finally painfully beginning to understand the punchline of a very long and very cruel joke. As dusk settled over the lake, The last of the sun's fire bleeding out of the sky. The hope I had been nursing all day finally died. It wasn't a dramatic sudden death. It was a slow, quiet fading, like an ember turning to ash. Morgan and Lance were not going to call. They were not going to text. They had not just been busy, they had forgotten. Or a colder, more terrifying thought began to form. They had not forgotten, they had chosen not to remember. The loneliness which had been a quiet ache all day, now became a sharp physical pain. It was a hollowness in my chest, a tightness in my throat. I stood at the glass wall, watching my own reflection superimpose itself over the darkening water. I saw a woman who looked elegant, composed, successful, a woman who had everything. But I felt like that gap-toothed little girl in my cousin's photo, sitting alone at a party no one had come to. A fierce internal battle began to rage within me. One part of my mind, the logical, proud scientist, was furious. Let it go, Althea, it said. Do not beg for scraps of affection. Your dignity is worth more than this. You are above this. But another part, the soft, vulnerable and deeply wounded mother, was crying out. Just reach out, it whispered. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe something happened. Just send a message. Give her a chance to make it right. For an hour, I was paralyzed by this internal war. I paced the length of the living room, my bare feet making no sound on the polished floor. I made another cup of tea. I didn't drink. I scrolled through old photos of Morgan on my phone. Morgan at her first ballet recital. Morgan on our trip to the Smithsonian. Morgan beaming as I helped her move into her dorm at Duke. Where had that girl gone? When had the easy, loving connection between us been replaced by this strange, formal distance, punctuated by transactional calls, and now, this deafening silence? I thought about their life. The penthouse in uptown Charlotte, the endless cycle of social events, charity galas, and weekend trips, the carefully curated online presence that projected an image of effortless success, a life I had funded, a life I had made possible. And for what? So they could be too busy, too important to remember their own mother's 60th birthday. The anger was there, a hot, simmering current beneath the surface. But beneath the anger was a deeper, colder layer of hurt. A simple primal need to be loved by my own child. The mother in me won the battle. With a sigh of surrender, I sat down on the edge of my sofa, the sleek leather cool against my skin. I opened my phone and went to our family group chat, a space usually reserved for logistical questions and bland pleasantries. I stared at the blinking cursor, my thumbs hovering over the keyboard. What could I even say? My first instinct was to lash out. I can't believe you forgot my birthday. But that was accusatory. It would put them on the defensive. Then I considered something more sarcastic. Hope you're both having a wonderful day. Just wanted to let you know it's my 60th in case it slipped your minds. But that was passive-aggressive. A tone I had always despised. No. If I was going to do this, if I was going to lower my shield and expose the soft, wounded part of myself, I had to do it with honesty. I had to tell them the simple, unvarnished truth of how I was feeling. My thumbs began to move, slowly at first, then with a sad certainty, I typed out the words, each one a small, painful admission of my own loneliness. Feeling a little forgotten, on my 60th birthday today, I read the message back. It was quiet. It was vulnerable. It was not a demand or an accusation. It was a simple statement of fact, an opening for them to walk through. It was a test, a final gentle plea for them to see me, their mother, not as a resource but as a person with feelings. My finger hovered over the send button for a long moment. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at me not to do it. Don't show them your weakness. Don't give them that power. But the need for connection was stronger. I pressed send. The small blue bubble popped onto the screen, followed by the tiny cruel word delivered. I set the phone down on the cushion beside me, face up. My heart was pounding, a frantic trapped bird in my chest. I felt a profound sense of dread, but also a sliver of hope. Maybe this would be the wake-up call. Maybe they would be horrified by their oversight. Maybe my phone would ring in a few seconds with a torrent of frantic, loving apologies. I waited, my eyes fixed on the dark, silent screen. The minutes after I sent the text stretched into an eternity. The silence in the house seemed to deepen, becoming heavier, more expectant. The only sound was the frantic, hopeful thrumming of my own heart. I stared at the phone, my entire being focused on that small, dark rectangle of glass, willing it to light up with the response that would soothe the ache in my chest. A response that would tell me this was all a terrible misunderstanding. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The hope began to curdle into a sick, anxious dread. I could see the read receipt. They had seen the message. The silence was no longer an oversight. It was a choice. They were likely crafting a response, or perhaps Morgan was waiting for Lance's input on how to best manage her emotional needy mother. Finally, after 12 minutes that felt like 12 years, the screen lit up. The notification banner appeared at the top. It was from the family group chat. It was from Morgan. My body flooded with relief. A warm wave that momentarily washed away the anxiety. She was replying. It was going to be okay. I took a deep, steadying breath and lifted the phone, my thumb swiping to open the message. The words appeared on the screen, stark and black against the white background. They were not the words of apology I had braced myself for. They were not the words of a daughter horrified by her own forgetfulness. They were something else entirely. Something cold and sharp and utterly devastating. We need space from you. Please don't reach out anymore. I read the sentence once, twice. A third time, my mind, the same analytical mind, that could decipher complex molecular bonds, struggled to process the brutal simplicity of the words. It was like reading a foreign language I had never encountered. We need space from you. The we was a deliberate, unified front. This wasn't just her, it was them. A decision had been made, a verdict had been rendered. Please don't reach out anymore. It wasn't a request, it was a command, a banishment. My breath hitched in my throat. A cold shock so profound it was almost a physical blow, radiated through my body, leaving my hands numb, my vision blurry. This was not a response to my forgotten birthday. This was something else. This was a calculated, premeditated act of cruelty. My vulnerable text had not been an olive branch. It had been an opening, an opportunity for them to deliver a blow they had clearly been waiting to land. And then, as if the initial wound was not deep enough, a second, more insidious injury was inflicted. A small icon appeared beneath the message bubble. A tiny, almost imperceptible blue thumbs up. The notification text was clear and precise. Liked by Lance Cooper. If Morgan's text was the dagger, Lance's like was the deliberate, vicious twist of the blade. It was a silent, smug affirmation, a co-signature on my exile. It was a small, petty, digital gesture that conveyed a universe of contempt. He wasn't just supporting his wife. He was endorsing her cruelty. He was reveling in it. I could almost see them sitting across from each other in some expensive restaurant, Morgan typing the words with a self-righteous fire in her eyes, then showing the phone to Lance, who would nod in approval, a thin, satisfied smile on his face as he tapped the like button. In that moment, something inside me broke. But it was not the fragile, hopeful part of me that had been aching all day. That part was already gone, obliterated by Morgan's text. No, what broke was something much older, much deeper. It was the dam, the one I had built over decades to hold back the full, formidable force of my own anger, my own pride, my own sense of self-worth. It was the dam of maternal sacrifice, of endless patience, of quiet, uncomplaining generosity. And it didn't just break, it vaporized. The wave of grief and hurt that had been threatening to drown me all day did not come. Instead, it was replaced by a tidal wave of pure, cold, clarifying rage. It wasn't a hot, screaming anger. It was the detached, analytical fury of a scientist watching a carefully controlled experiment go catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. The variables were clear. The hypothesis that my unconditional love and financial support would foster a loving, respectful relationship had been proven false. The results were in, and they were damning. My love had not been seen as love. It had been seen as an obligation. My generosity had not been seen as a gift. It had been seen as a resource, an endlessly renewable, endlessly available resource that they felt entitled to, a resource that they now believed they could access without the inconvenient emotional cost of having a relationship with the woman who provided it. I looked from the cruel text to the smug little thumbs up beneath it. I saw my daughter and her husband not as my family but as a hostile entity, a parasitic organism that had attached itself to my life's work. The scientist in me, the woman who had built an empire on logic and decisive action, took over. An experiment that has failed so spectacularly does not require tweaking. It requires termination. You do not reason with the toxic variable. You do not plead with it. You isolate it. You neutralize it. And you remove it from the equation. My hands, which had been trembling with shock, were now perfectly steady. My mind, which had been clouded with emotional turmoil, was now sharp and clear as glass. I knew with an absolute and terrifying certainty, Exactly what I had to do. The grief was over. The reckoning was about to begin. The moments after the text arrived were strangely serene. The tidal wave of rage did not result in a storm of weeping or shouting. It receded, leaving behind a landscape of crystalline, cold clarity. The emotional, wounded mother had left the building. In her place was Dr. Althea Grant, founder and CEO, the woman who had navigated hostile takeovers, who had stared down the FDA, who had built a billion-dollar company from nothing but her own mind and will. My house was no longer a home. It was a laboratory, and I was about to conduct my final and most important experiment. My hypothesis had been that a foundation of unconditional love, expressed through boundless financial support, would create a self-sustaining, loving familial bond. That hypothesis had been spectacularly disproven. The data was in, and it was irrefutable. My daughter and her husband had become a toxic variable, a contaminant in the carefully controlled environment of my life. In biochemistry, when a culture is contaminated, you don't try to reason with the bacteria. You don't hope it will change its nature. You sterilize the environment. You cut off its nutrient source. You starve it until it dies. And then you begin again with a clean slate. I stood up from the sofa, my movements precise and economical. I walked from the living area past the silent monument of my awards, and into my home office. This was my true sanctuary, a room of glass and steel overlooking the placid dark waters of the lake. The room was my mind, externalized, clean, orderly, and powerful. I sat down in the ergonomic leather chair behind my large glass desk. The chair sighed softly, a familiar sound of command. My objective was simple: to isolate and neutralize the contaminant. This required a two-pronged approach. First, I had to sever the financial nutrient source. Second, I had to sever the lines of communication to prevent further contamination. The actions had to be swift, comprehensive, and absolute. No half measures. No room for negotiation. I thought about the life they were living, the one I had so diligently funded. The penthouse in Uptown with its breathtaking views and crippling mortgage, a mortgage paid for by an automatic transfer from an account I funded. The wellness consultancy Morgan ran from a chic office space in South End, its rent and operating costs all flowing from a business trust I had established. The portfolio of angel investments Lance managed. A portfolio of my own blue-chip stocks that he played with like a child with a chemistry set, boasting of his successes and quietly burying his frequent costly failures. The credit cards, the club memberships, the cars. It was an entire ecosystem, a web of dependencies, all leading back to a single source: me. I had built their world, and now I was going to unbuild it. My anger did not feel like a destructive force. It felt like a creative one. I was not tearing something down out of spite. I was clearing the ground for something new. I was conducting a controlled burn to allow for the possibility of healthy new growth in the future. A future where my daughter might learn the meaning of consequence, where she might discover the value of a dollar she had actually earned, where our relationship, if it were to ever exist again, would be built not on a financial transaction, but on a foundation of mutual respect. The path forward was clear, a series of logical sequential steps. I would not act emotionally. I would not send a single angry text in reply. My response would not be a message, it would be an action, a series of actions so total, so decisive, that they would constitute a new law of nature in their universe. The law of cause and effect, a law from which they had been so thoroughly insulated their entire lives. The cause, their cruel, calculated dismissal; the effect, the immediate and total cessation of the life they knew. I swiveled in my chair to face the integrated communications panel built into my desk. My finger hovered over the speed dial button for my personal wealth manager, a man named Arthur Vance who had managed my fortune for 2 decades. Arthur was a brilliant, discreet man who understood numbers, but more importantly, he understood me. He knew the story behind the numbers. He had seen Morgan grow up. He had quietly, respectfully, questioned the size and scope of the trusts I had established years ago. "Are you sure you want to make it quite so effortless for them, Althea?" he had asked gently. I had dismissed his concerns then, blinded by a mother's love. Arthur, I thought with a grim sense of irony, was about to have a very interesting evening. I looked at the phone, at Morgan's brutal words one last time. I felt no hesitation, no flicker of doubt. The scientist in me was calm, her objective clear. The experiment was about to begin. The time for observation was over. It was time to change the variables. My finger pressed the button for Arthur Vance's private line. It was nearly 8:00 p.m., well after business hours, but I knew he would answer. For the kind of money I paid his firm, he was always on call. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm and professional, as always. "Althea," he said, a note of pleasant surprise in his tone. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Everything all right, Arthur?" I began, my voice a blade of polished steel. There was no room for pleasantries. "I need you to listen very carefully. I am about to give you a series of instructions, and they are to be executed immediately. Not tomorrow morning, tonight. Is your system accessible from your home?" The shift in my tone was not lost on him. The warmth in his voice was replaced by a focused professional alertness. "Yes, of course," he said. "I'm logging in as we speak. What do you need, Althea?" "First," I said, "trust fund I, the Morgan Cooper Personal Trust. I want the next quarterly disbursement, and all subsequent disbursements, cancelled. Indefinitely." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by the soft, rapid clicking of his keyboard. "Cancelled," he repeated, his voice tight. "Not postponed, cancelled." "That is correct," I said. "Next, Trust Fund B, the Cooper Family Business Trust, which funds her consultancy. Freeze it. Deny all outgoing payments. Effective immediately. The rent for her office space is due on the 1st of the month. Ensure that payment does not go through." More clicking. I could picture him in his own home office, a man of quiet habits, his world of predictable numbers and long-term strategies suddenly thrown into chaos. "Freeze outgoing payments," he confirmed. "Understood." "Third, the investment portfolio you manage on behalf of Lance Cooper. As you know, I am the primary benefactor and hold ultimate authority over that account. I want you to revoke his access, immediately. Change all passwords. Lock him out of the trading platform. And I want you to begin the process of liquidating all high-risk speculative assets he has invested in. Reallocate everything to stable low-yield municipal bonds under my sole control." This time, Arthur let out a low whistle. "Althea, that's a significant portfolio. Locking him out is one thing, but a full liquidation will have consequences." "I am aware of the consequences, Arthur," I said, my voice cutting off any potential argument. "That is the point. Revoke his access. Now." "Yes, of course," he said, the sound of his typing becoming more frantic. "Access revoked." "Finally," I continued, moving down my mental checklist. "The supplementary credit cards. The American Express Platinum, the Neiman Marcus card, the Visa Black card. All of them are extensions of my primary accounts. I want them cancelled. Report them as compromised, if you must. I don't care what the reason is. Just make sure that the next time they are swiped, they are declined." Arthur was silent for a long moment after I finished. The only sound was his quiet breathing. He was processing the sheer brutal totality of my instructions. He was a man who managed fortunes, but he was also a man who had known me for 20 years. He knew this wasn't just a financial decision. It was a seismic family event. "Althea," he finally said, his voice gentle, cautious. "May I ask, is everything all right with you and Morgan?" It was the question of a friend, not a banker. The old me might have broken down, might have poured out the whole sorry tale of my lonely birthday and my daughter's casual cruelty. But the old me was gone. "Everything," I said, my voice utterly calm, "is about to be. Send me a confirmation email when all of these actions are complete. I expect it within the hour." I ended the call before he could say another word. I had built the gilded cage and I had just locked the door from the outside. The supply chain of their entire existence, from their housing to their health care, from their groceries to their designer clothes, had been severed at the root. They didn't know it yet. They were still at their celebratory dinner, basking in the glow of their newfound space. But their world had already ended. The asteroid had already struck. They just hadn't seen the fallout yet. With the financial architecture of their lives dismantled, it was time for the final, more intimate step. The first set of actions had been a strategic impersonal exercise in asset reallocation. This next part was personal. It was about creating my own peace, about ensuring the toxic contaminants I had just isolated could not breach the perimeter of my newly sterilized environment. I sat at my desk, my phone in my hand. The screen was still open to the group chat. Morgan's cruel words stared up at me. Still liked by her husband. I looked at them one last time, not with pain but with a detached clinical finality. This was the last piece of communication I would ever receive from them that I had not explicitly consented to. My thumb moved with a swift, deliberate purpose. I opened Morgan's contact profile. Her picture smiled up at me, a selfie taken on a yacht during a vacation in the Greek Isles last summer. A vacation I had paid for. A memory of a happiness that was, I now realized, entirely transactional. I scrolled to the bottom of the screen. The option was there in stark red letters, block this caller. I pressed it, a confirmation bubble popped up. Are you sure you want to block this contact? You will not receive phone calls, messages or FaceTime calls from people on the block list. I felt a moment's hesitation, a final faint echo of the mother I used to be, blocking your own child. It was an act of such profound severance it felt like a violation of some natural law. But then I looked again at her text. We need space from you. Please don't reach out anymore. This wasn't a violation, it was an agreement. I was simply giving her exactly what she had asked for. I was granting her wish with prejudice. I pressed block contact. Her contact photo vanished, replaced by a generic gray silhouette. It was done. Next I pulled up Lance's contact. His photo was a smug, professionally taken headshot. He looked like a man who believed his own hype. I felt no hesitation at all. I blocked him with a satisfying definitive tap. Then I moved to social media. I opened the app where my cousin had tagged me, the same app where Morgan and Lance curated their perfect life. I went to Morgan's profile. It was a sea of pastel-colored images. Morgan doing yoga in an artfully lit studio. Morgan holding a green juice, Lance and Morgan clinking glasses on a rooftop bar, the Gilded Path. The name of her consultancy was a perfect, unintentional metaphor for their entire existence. I blocked her, then I blocked Lance. One by one I went through every digital channel that connected us, every app, every platform, and I methodically silently closed the door. Each block was a small satisfying click, the sound of a lock turning, securing my peace. When I was finished, a profound sense of calm settled over me. The silence in the house was no longer the oppressive, lonely silence of being forgotten. It was the clean, quiet, and powerful silence of being in control. It was the silence of a laboratory after a successful, if volatile, experiment has been concluded. I had created a firewall, a digital and emotional boundary that they could not breach. My phone buzzed on the desk. My heart didn't leap. I glanced at it calmly. It was the email from Arthur Vance. Subject: actions complete. The body of the email was a simple bullet-pointed list, confirming that every one of my instructions had been carried out. The trusts were frozen. The access was revoked. The cards were cancelled. I closed the email and shut my laptop. I stood up and walked to the vast glass wall overlooking the lake. The moon was high now, a perfect silver disk casting a shimmering path across the dark water. The storm of the day had passed, leaving a sky of impossible, brilliant clarity. I had spent my entire life building things, a company, a fortune, a family. I had learned tonight that sometimes the most powerful act is not to build but to dismantle, to take apart the things that are causing you harm. They wanted space. I had given them an entire universe of it, and in doing so I had reclaimed my own. While I was methodically dismantling their world, Morgan and Lance were celebrating its supposed reinforcement. They were at the Porterhouse, an exclusive Charlotte steakhouse where the steaks were dry-aged and the wine list was as thick as a novel. The restaurant was a symphony of hushed conversations, the clinking of heavy silverware, and the low glow of ambient lighting. It was their natural habitat. Morgan felt a thrilling, unfamiliar sense of power. Sending that text to her mother had been terrifying, but now, hours later, the terror had been replaced by a heady sense of self-righteous empowerment. She had finally done it. She had set a boundary. I still can't believe I sent that, she said to Lance, a small, proud smile playing on her lips. She took a delicate sip of her outrageously expensive Cabernet. Lance reached across the table and took her hand. His expression was one of deep performative admiration. You were amazing, babe, he said, his voice a low, soothing murmur. It needed to be done. For years she's used her money to control us, to keep us under her thumb, that constant guilt. The expectation that we have to be grateful all the time, it's suffocating. It was a narrative they had carefully constructed together over the past few years. A story that allowed them to live off her fortune while casting themselves as the victims of her emotional manipulation. In their version of reality, my generosity was a weapon, my love a form of control. Their dependence was my fault, not a consequence of their own choices. I mean, the birthday text, Morgan continued. shaking her head as if remembering a great trauma. It was the last straw, so passive-aggressive, feeling a little forgotten. It's like, what did she expect? For us to drop everything and throw her some huge party. We have lives, you know? My consultancy is finally taking off. Her consultancy, The Gilded Path, had exactly 3 clients, all of whom were friends of her mother's whom I had gently strong-armed into hiring her. The business was a fiction, a stage set I had paid for so my daughter could feel important. Exactly, Lance agreed, squeezing her hand. And I'm trying to close that new crypto deal. It's a huge opportunity. We can't be expected to manage her feelings on top of everything else. We needed to draw a line in the sand, for our own mental health. He raised his wine glass. To us, he said, his eyes gleaming in the candlelight. To our new chapter. To finally having the space we need to thrive. To us, Morgan echoed, clinking her glass against his. The sound was a clear, perfect note in the hushed restaurant. They drank. A silent, smug toast to their own bravery. The waiter arrived with their food. A massive porterhouse for Lance. A delicate filet mignon for Morgan. They ate with the easy, unburdened pleasure of people who have never had to look at the right side of the menu. They talked about their future, a future they saw as a limitless horizon of possibilities. All built on a foundation they believed to be unshakable. They planned a ski trip to Aspen for the winter, discussed upgrading Lance's car to the newest model. They were 2 architects designing a magnificent castle in the air, blissfully unaware that the very ground beneath them had just been vaporized. When the bill came, presented in a small leather folio, Lance didn't even glance at it. He simply took out the sleek black American Express card, the one I paid for, the one with no preset spending limit, and handed it to the waiter. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered to Morgan with a wink, as the waiter walked away. Morgan laughed. A light, carefree sound. It was the laugh of a woman who had just successfully asserted her independence, entirely on her mother's dime. It was the last truly carefree sound either of them would make for a very long time. The new chapter began the very next morning, and it was not at all what Morgan had envisioned. The day started, as it always did, with an 8:00 a.m. hot Pilates class at a studio so exclusive it had a waiting list for the waiting list. Morgan emerged an hour later, glowing with a virtuous sweat, feeling centered and powerful. She had set her boundaries. She was in control of her life. She walked with a friend to a chic organic cafe next door, a place where a single smoothie cost $25. They ordered their usuals and chatted about an upcoming charity auction. "I have my eye on a diamond bracelet," her friend said, "but I'll probably have to fight your husband for it. Lance always goes big at the auctions. He likes to make an impression," Morgan said with a serene, knowing smile. The conversation was a familiar ritual, a subtle reinforcement of her own status, a status built entirely on a lie. When it was time to pay, Morgan breezily tapped her supplementary Amex card on the reader. The machine beeped. A harsh, unfriendly sound. A small red light flashed. Declined. Morgan frowned. "That's weird," she said, trying to keep her voice light, casual. "The reader must be acting up. Try it again." The barista, a young woman with a nose ring and an air of profound boredom, ran it again. Same result. "Sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "It's not going through." A hot flush of embarrassment crept up Morgan's neck. Her friend was watching, her expression a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. In their world, a declined card was not just an inconvenience, it was a social faux pas, a sign that something was deeply wrong in the perfect polished facade. "It must be a fraud alert," Morgan said quickly, forcing a laugh. "My mother is probably on some spending spree and they flagged the account. Let me try a different one." She pulled out the Visa Black card, the one reserved for emergencies. She handed it to the barista with a confident smile. "This one will work." The barista swiped it. And then, a moment of pure cinematic horror for Morgan. The machine made a series of sharp, angry beeps, and the barista's eyes went wide. The young woman said, looking at the screen and then back at Morgan with a new, unwelcome interest. "It says this card has been reported, cancelled." The word hung in the air. Cancelled. Not declined. Not a fraud alert. Cancelled. The embarrassment Morgan had felt moments before was replaced by a cold, sharp spike of pure dread. This wasn't a glitch. This was an action. Her friend, sensing a real crisis, quickly paid for both of their smoothies. "Don't worry about it, sweetie," she said, her voice a little too bright. Morgan barely heard her. She was already outside on the sidewalk, her smoothie forgotten, frantically trying to call Lance. Her mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. Had her wallet been stolen, and the thief had cancelled her cards? But she had her wallet right here. Had her mother discovered some huge fraudulent charge and cancelled everything in a panic? It was possible. Lance, pick up, she muttered, her heart hammering against her ribs. He finally answered, his voice groggy. He was clearly still in bed. Lance, something is wrong, she said, her voice a high, tight wire of panic. All my cards are being declined. The visa was cancelled. You need to call the bank. Something has happened. She heard him sit up, the rustle of sheets through the phone. What? Cancelled? That's impossible. Calm down, Morgan. It's probably just a mistake. I'll log into the portfolio account and move some money to our checking. It'll be fine. His confidence was reassuring. A familiar balm. He was the man who handled the money, who understood the complex world of finance. He would fix this. Okay, she said, taking a shaky breath. Okay, just fix it, fast. I'm heading to the spa and I do not want to be embarrassed again. She hung up the phone, the dread receding slightly, replaced by a simmering annoyance. She was annoyed at the bank, at the inconvenience, at the universe for disrupting her perfectly curated morning. She had no idea that the small, embarrassing crack that had just appeared in the facade of her life was about to become a gaping, terrifying chasm. The first tremor had hit, and the earthquake was on its way. Lance Cooper considered himself a modern-day Midas. Everything he touched, he believed, turned to gold. He had a natural instinct for the market, an eye for the next big thing, or so he told himself. The reality was that he was a man playing a high-stakes video game with the cheat codes enabled. The family investment portfolio wasn't a product of his genius. It was a vast, regenerating pool of my capital that allowed him to absorb his frequent losses and magnify his occasional lucky wins. He ended the call with Morgan, a sigh of annoyance escaping his lips. Her dramatics were exhausting. A cancelled card. It was clearly a clerical error, a problem for some underpaid bank employee to solve. He, on the other hand, had more important things to do. He had his eye on a volatile new cryptocurrency that his golf buddies were raving about, and he wanted to shift a significant sum into it before it took off. He rolled out of his king-sized bed, walked into his home office with its panoramic view of the Charlotte skyline, and sat down at his custom-built trading station. He opened his laptop, typed in his password, and navigated to the familiar sleek interface of the wealth management portal. He entered his login credentials and hit enter. The page refreshed, but instead of the usual dashboard showing charts, graphs, and the multi-million-dollar valuation of his playground, a simple stark message appeared in a red box. Access denied. Please contact your account administrator for assistance. Lance stared at the screen. He blinked. He typed his password again, slowly this time, making sure each character was correct. He hit enter. Same result. Access denied. A cold knot of unease began to form in the pit of his stomach. This wasn't a glitch. Glitches gave you error codes, spinning wheels, messages about server maintenance. This was a locked door. A digital deadbolt. What the hell? He muttered. He tried the firm's mobile app. Same message. His annoyance was quickly escalating into real concern. He decided to check their primary checking account, the one from which all their bills were automatically paid. He logged into the bank's website. The page loaded, and for a terrifying second, his heart stopped. The balance, which should have been comfortably in the six figures after the last quarterly disbursement, was now a shocking, impossible number, $347.12. He stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. Where was the money? Where was the $250,000 from Althea's trust? He frantically pulled up the transaction history. He saw the regular outgoing payments, the automatic draft for the penthouse mortgage, the payment for his leased Porsche, the country club dues, but there were no incoming funds. The massive quarterly deposit, the lifeblood of their existence, was simply missing. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He grabbed his phone to call their personal banker, a man he had on speed dial for just such occasions. As he did, an email notification popped up on his screen. The subject line made his blood run cold. Urgent. Mortgage payment failed. He opened the email. It was an automated alert from the bank. The automatic payment for their penthouse, a staggering $15,000 a month, had been declined due to insufficient funds. The room began to spin. Declined mortgage, no access to the portfolio. An empty checking account, cancelled credit cards. This wasn't a series of unfortunate glitches. This was a coordinated, systematic demolition, and there was only one person in the world with the power and the authority to execute it. Althea. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Her silence was not a sign of hurt feelings. It was the quiet, methodical prelude to an execution. Morgan's smug little text, the one he had so gleefully liked, had not been a declaration of independence. It had been a declaration of war, a war they had just lost in a single devastating strategic strike. His hands were shaking as he dialed Morgan's number. She answered on the first ring, her voice a sharp, annoyed hiss. "Did you fix it? I'm in the lobby of the spa and I'm not about to." "Listen to me," Lance interrupted, his voice a low, panicked whisper. "Listen to me, very carefully. It's not a glitch. The money is gone, Morgan, all of it. The trust fund, the portfolio, the checking account, it's empty. I think your mother just cut us off." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. He had said the unthinkable, the impossible. He had given voice to their ultimate unspoken terror. And now it was real. The silence that followed Lance's pronouncement was the sound of a world ending. Morgan stood in the hushed marble-floored lobby of the spa, the scent of lavender and eucalyptus suddenly cloying and suffocating. The reality of his words was too vast, too cataclysmic to process all at once. It was like being told the sun had just gone out. "What?" she finally whispered into the phone, her voice a thin, fragile thread. "What do you mean gone? That's not possible. It's my trust fund. It's my money." "No, Morgan, you don't understand," Lance said, his voice rising in a frantic crescendo. "It was never our money. It was always hers. She was the primary on everything, and she just turned off the tap. The mortgage just bounced. Bounced. Do you have any idea what that means?" Of course she didn't. She had never had to think about a mortgage, a bill, a consequence. These were the mundane, ugly problems of other people. But the raw, unfiltered terror in her husband's voice was impossible to ignore. It was the sound of a safety net being ripped away, leaving only a long, terrifying fall. "Call her," Morgan said, her voice a sharp command born of pure panic. "Call her right now and fix this. Apologize for the text. Tell her I was having a bad day. Tell her whatever you have to. Just fix it, Lance." "I'm trying," he yelled back. "What do you think I'm doing?" And so it began. The frantic, desperate siege of my digital fortress. From his condo overlooking the city, Lance started the assault. He called my number. The call went straight to the electronic void of a blocked contact. It didn't even ring. He tried again, and again. The result was the same. He sent a text, a frantic jumble of words. "Althea, we need to talk. There's been a huge misunderstanding. Please call me." The message was sent, but the delivery receipt never appeared. It had vanished into the ether. From the spa lobby, Morgan began her own barrage. She called, straight to voicemail. She sent a text, no delivery. She tried messaging me on every social media platform. Her messages were met with the cold, impersonal notification: "This user cannot receive messages at this time." Panic metastasized into a full-blown meltdown. Morgan left the spa, her appointment forgotten, and rushed home, her mind a whirlwind of disbelief and rage. How dare she? How dare her mother do this? This wasn't a lesson, it was an act of nuclear retaliation. Back in their penthouse, the two of them became a frantic, dysfunctional command center of denial. They spent the next hour in a blur of escalating desperation. They called my number from their landline. They called from their laptops, using a web service. Each call was met with the same impenetrable silence. They started calling anyone they thought might be able to reach me. They called my personal assistant from my time at Origin, a woman who politely informed them she no longer managed my personal schedule. They called my lawyer, whose secretary told them in a voice of pure ice that all communications must be submitted in writing. They even called Eris Thorne, my old colleague. Eris, bless her loyal heart, listened to their frantic rambling story and then said in the calm, analytical tone of a scientist, "It sounds to me like Dr. Grant has made a decision. I suggest you respect it." Then she hung up. With every failed attempt, their world shrank. The powerful, well-connected couple they believed themselves to be were revealed as nothing more than two satellites, suddenly and violently cut off from their host star, left to drift in the cold, dark void. The call log on their phones became a testament to their spiraling desperation, a long, scrolling list of failure. "Mom," voicemail, Mom, 2, voicemail, Mom, Lol, voicemail, Mom, 3, voicemail. On and on it went. The number of missed calls on my blocked log, had they been able to see it, climbed relentlessly. 20, 40, 60, by noon it had crested 99 plus. A number so high the phone stopped counting. It was a digital scream into a soundproof room. I of course heard none of it. My morning was the most peaceful I had experienced in years. I had turned my phone onto Do Not Disturb, allowing calls only from a few select contacts like my doctor and my oldest friend. I did some gardening. I read a book by the lake. I listened to a Nina Simone record. The silence was a beautiful healing symphony. I had created the space they'd asked for, and now from the soundless depths of that space they were screaming my name, and I, for the first time, was not listening. By late afternoon, the digital siege had failed. Every text had gone unanswered. Every call swallowed by the void of my blocked number. The initial shock and panic had curdled into a desperate, frantic need for a direct confrontation. A face-to-face. They were used to getting their way, used to their presence alone being enough to command attention. They decided to take the fight directly to my doorstep. They drove out of the city, Lance's Porsche eating up the highway miles. The sleek, powerful car a hollow mockery of a wealth they no longer possessed. They were silent for most of the drive, stewing in a toxic brew of fear and blame. The carefully constructed partnership of their marriage was beginning to fracture under the immense, unfamiliar pressure. "This is your fault," Lance said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "You and that stupid, arrogant text. We need space. What were you thinking?" "Me?" Morgan shot back, her voice shrill. "You're the one who liked it. You were sitting right there, goading me on. Set a boundary, babe. Remember that?" "I thought you were setting an emotional boundary," he yelled. "I didn't think you were going to financially guillotine us." They pulled into the entrance of my gated community, a place they had entered hundreds of times without a second thought. The familiar ornate gates in the small friendly guardhouse had always been symbols of their access, their belonging. Today, they were a barrier. A uniformed guard, a pleasant man named Frank whom they had known for years, stepped out of the booth. He recognized the car and smiled, but he held up a hand, stopping them just before the electronic arm. "Afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Cooper," Frank said, his voice polite but firm. "Just need to check the list before I can let you through." Morgan leaned out the window, her patience completely gone. "Frank, it's us. Morgan and Lance. We're going to my mother's house." "Dr. Grant." Frank didn't move. He consulted the clipboard in his hand, running a finger down the list of approved guests. He did it slowly, methodically. He was following his orders. "My orders?" "I see," he said, and his friendly demeanor was replaced by a professional, impenetrable neutrality. "I'm sorry, but Dr. Grant updated her permanent access list this morning. Your names are no longer on it." The words were delivered with a bland, bureaucratic finality, but they landed on Morgan and Lance with the force of a physical blow. This was a new level of excommunication. It wasn't just digital, it was physical. They were literally being locked out. "What?" Morgan sputtered, her voice a mixture of disbelief and outrage. "That's ridiculous. There must be a mistake. She's expecting us call her. Call her right now." "I can't do that, ma'am," Frank said, his voice still maddeningly calm. "My instructions are very clear. No one gets through unless they are on this list. Unless Dr. Grant calls me personally to authorize your entry, I can't open the gate." "Then get her on the phone," Lance snapped, his own control shattering. "Tell her daughter is here." "As I said, sir," Frank replied, his expression hardening slightly. "I cannot contact Dr. Grant for you. You'll have to reach her yourself." The beautiful, cruel irony of his statement was not lost on them. They looked from the impassive guard to the closed gates. The wrought iron bars, a stark physical manifestation of the boundary they had so flippantly demanded. They sat there for 10 minutes, a silent, furious tableau of impotence. They tried calling me again, the calls going to the same silent, digital graveyard. They were trapped, caught between the world they had been exiled from, and the one that was rapidly collapsing around them. Finally, defeated, Lance put the car in reverse. The shame was a burning, acid thing in their stomachs. Frank, the security guard, watched them go, his face unreadable. He had his orders. The Queen was in her castle, and for the first time in a very long time she had pulled up the drawbridge. The siege was over. The exile was complete. Being turned away at the gates of my home was the final, humiliating confirmation of their new reality. The drive back to the city was a descent into a fresh hell of recrimination and panic. The unified we of Morgan's text had completely dissolved. Now it was just a bitter, terrified you and me. My names are no longer on the list, Lance mimicked, his voice a cruel high-pitched imitation of Frank the security guard. Congratulations, Morgan. You didn't just ask for space. You got us evicted from the entire family. I hope you're happy. Oh, save it, Lance, Morgan snapped back, her own fear manifesting as venomous rage. You were just as happy to spend her money. Don't you dare act like you're some innocent victim in all this. Your angel investments have probably lost her more money than my entire consultancy. At least I was trying to build something. He roared. What do? You take pictures of avocado toast and call it a brand? The argument raged, a wildfire in the claustrophobic confines of the Porsche. They were tearing each other apart, trying to assign blame for a catastrophe they had co-authored. They returned to their penthouse to find a new horror waiting for them. Taped to the gleaming wood of their front door was a crisp white envelope. It was an official notice from the building's management. It was a formal 5-day eviction warning for non-payment of their mortgage and HOA fees. The sight of it, the legal language, the stark finality of it, broke something in Morgan. She slid down the wall in the hallway, her designer handbag slumping beside her, and began to sob, not the delicate performative tears she used for sympathy, but racking, ugly sobs of pure, unadulterated terror. The unraveling accelerated over the next 48 hours with a brutal systematic efficiency. The next morning, a notice was posted on the door of the Gilded Path, Morgan's beautiful, useless office space. It was another eviction notice. The news traveled through the gossipy world of Charlotte's elite at the speed of light. Morgan's phone, which had been silent with unanswered calls to me, now began to light up with texts from her friends, their messages a sickeningly sweet blend of feigned concern and thinly veiled glee. The ultimate humiliation came that afternoon. Lance was in the residence parking garage, about to get into his Porsche, when a tow truck lumbered down the ramp. A man in greasy overalls got out, consulted a clipboard and began hooking up the car. Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing? Lance shouted, running towards him. The man barely looked at him. Lance Cooper, Porsche 911, repossession for non-payment of lease. He grunted as he attached a final hook. You need to take it up with the bank, buddy. I just drive the truck. Lance stood there helpless and impotent, as his 6-figure status symbol, the very embodiment of his fraudulent success, was unceremoniously dragged up the ramp and out into the street. The entire scene was witnessed by a neighbor, a rival investor who watched from his own luxury car with a slow, satisfied smirk. That night, the fight in the penthouse was no longer about blame. It was about survival. They were trapped in their beautiful prison, surrounded by expensive objects they no longer owned, with no money, no credit, and no way out. The foundation of their marriage, which had been built on the soft, comfortable ground of my fortune, was now revealed to be nothing at all. We have to sell my jewelry, Morgan said, her voice dead, as she looked at the diamond earrings Lance had given her for their anniversary, earrings they had purchased with my money. That won't even cover next month's mortgage. Even if we could stop the eviction, Lance said, his head in his hands. We're ruined, Morgan. It's over. The facade had not just cracked, it had been pulverized. They were left with nothing but the ugly, unflattering truth of who they were. Two spoiled, helpless children finally forced to face a world without a safety net. And they were beginning to realize that the only thing worse than their financial ruin was the profound personal ruin of having willfully, arrogantly destroyed the one relationship that could have saved them. I let them marinate in the consequences for a full week. I knew, through the discreet daily reports from my security chief and the quiet updates from Arthur Vance, every humiliating detail of their unraveling. I knew about the eviction notices, the repossessed car, the frantic failed attempts to borrow money from friends who had suddenly grown distant. I knew they had turned on each other, their shared panic curdling into bitter resentment. I felt a grim, necessary satisfaction in these reports. This was the data I needed. This was the crucial phase of the experiment, where the subjects were fully exposed to the new, altered environment. I gave them no relief. I did not unblock their numbers. I did not answer the pleading emails that had begun to arrive from new anonymous accounts they had created. I remained a ghost, an immovable silent force whose presence was felt only in the devastating effects of my absence. After 7 days, I decided it was time for the next phase. They were terrified, they were broken, but they still did not understand the terms of their new reality. They needed a formal declaration, They needed a blueprint for their future, a future that I and I alone would dictate. I did not write the letter myself. An emotional appeal from me would be a weakness, an opening they might try to exploit. The correspondence had to be as cold, as clinical and as legally binding as the actions that had preceded it. I summoned my lead counsel, a sharp, formidable woman named Eleanor Vance, to my home. I laid out the terms with precise, dispassionate language. Eleanor listened, her face impassive, taking meticulous notes. She did not offer an opinion on the family dynamics. Her job was to translate my will into an ironclad legal document. The next day, a legal courier arrived at their uptown penthouse. He delivered a single thick cream-colored envelope with the seal of Charlotte's most powerful law firm embossed on the back. Inside, there was no personal letter. There was no Dear Morgan and Lance. It was a formal legal notice, addressed to Ms. Morgan Cooper and Mr. Lance Cooper. The document was 3 pages long. It began by formally confirming the indefinite suspension of all financial disbursements, lines of credit, and portfolio access from any and all accounts and trusts under my control. It used words like termination, revocation, and finality. The second section was the one that mattered. It outlined, in cold, clear numbered points, the only possible path forward. Financial independence. The document stated that no financial support of any kind would be reinstated until both individuals had secured and maintained full-time employment for a period of no less than 1 year, proven by tax returns and official letters of employment. Asset forfeiture. They were to vacate the penthouse apartment immediately. The lease would be terminated. All assets within furniture, art, electronics, all purchased with my funds were to be considered forfeit and would be liquidated. They would be allowed to leave with their clothes and personal effects. Nothing more. Therapeutic intervention. Any potential for a future personal relationship was contingent upon their joint and individual participation in mandatory family counseling. The therapist would be a court-certified professional of my choosing, and I would have full access to the therapist's progress reports. The goal of this therapy was stated clinically: to address issues of entitlement, financial dependency, and dysfunctional familial communication patterns. No direct contact. The final point was the most brutal. All communication with Dr. Althea Grant is to cease immediately. Any and all future correspondence must be conducted through legal counsel. Unsolicited attempts at direct contact will be considered a violation of these terms and will indefinitely postpone any possibility of reconciliation. The letter was a masterpiece of legal and psychological warfare. It was not a negotiation, it was a surrender document. It offered them a path, but it was a long, hard, and deeply humiliating one. It stripped them of everything: their home, their possessions, their pride, and offered them back only a sliver of hope. A chance to one day earn back a relationship they had so carelessly thrown away. I knew that this letter would be the final breaking point. It would either force them to confront the truth of their situation and begin the hard work of change, or it would shatter their already fractured relationship completely. Either way, the experiment was nearing its conclusion. The results were about to come in. The lawyer's letter was not a catalyst for unity. It was a bomb that obliterated the last frayed threads of Morgan and Lance's marriage. They read it together, standing in the living room of the penthouse they now knew they had to abandon, the cold, legal language sucking all the remaining air out of their world. For Lance, the letter was the final humiliation. It was a formal declaration of his failure, a document that stripped him of his last pretense of being a provider, an investor, a man of substance. His entire identity was a sham, and this letter was the legally binding proof. "This is insane," he seethed, pacing the floor. The letter crumpled in his fist. "Therapy? Progress reports. She's treating us like we're delinquent teenagers, and she's taking everything: the furniture, the art. This is punitive. It's cruel. It's her furniture, Lance." Morgan screamed back, her voice raw with a despair that had finally burned through her anger. "It was always her furniture, her apartment, her money. Don't you get it? We have nothing, we are nothing without her." "No," he said, turning on her, his eyes cold and hard. "I'm not nothing. I was a successful investor before I met you. I had my own life. This gilded cage, this dependence on your mother, this was your world, Morgan. I just lived in it. And now I'm done. I'm not going to some shrink. She picked to get progress reports like a lab rat. I'm not forfeiting my life to get back in her good graces." The successful investor he'd been before her was a junior analyst living in a rented apartment with 2 roommates. The life he'd had was a pale shadow of the one he had so eagerly embraced. But in this moment of total crisis he was rewriting history, casting himself as the victim, the man who had been dragged down by her family's dysfunction. "So what are you going to do?" Morgan asked, her voice trembling. "Just walk away?" "I'm going to survive," he said, his jaw tight. "I have friends. I have connections she can't touch. I'm getting out from under her thumb and your thumb. I'm done." He walked into the bedroom and began throwing his clothes into a suitcase. There was no more argument, no more debate. He was a man cutting his losses, abandoning a sinking ship. An hour later he was gone. He walked out of the penthouse, out of their marriage, out of the life he could no longer afford, without a backward glance. The silence he left behind was more profound, more complete, than any silence Morgan had ever experienced. For the first time in her 32 years, she was truly, utterly alone. She was alone in a vast, empty apartment that was no longer hers, surrounded by beautiful objects that would soon be taken away. She wandered through the rooms, her hand trailing along the cool marble of a countertop she hadn't paid for, staring at a painting she had never truly seen. The entire artifice of her life had been stripped away, and the person left standing in the ruins was a stranger to her. Who was she without the designer clothes, the exclusive parties, the curated Instagram feed? Who was she without her mother's money? The breakdown, when it came, was not loud or dramatic. It was a quiet internal collapse. She curled up on the vast empty bed, the same bed where she had felt so powerful just a week ago, and she wept. She wept for her lost life, for her failed marriage. But then, the tears began to change. She started to weep for her mother. She remembered a time when she was 10, sick with a terrible fever. I had stayed by her bedside for 3 days straight, bathing her forehead with a cool cloth, reading her stories until my voice was hoarse. I hadn't left her side. She remembered her college graduation, the look of pure unadulterated pride on my face, a pride that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with love. She thought of her cruel, careless text. "We need space from you." The words echoed in her mind, no longer a declaration of strength, but a confession of her own profound childish weakness. She hadn't wanted space from her mother. She had wanted to escape the quiet, persistent shame of her own dependency. She had wanted to wound a person whose love was a constant unspoken reminder of her own failure to build a life for herself. Lying there, alone in the wreckage of the life she had chosen, Morgan finally began to understand. The problem wasn't my control. The problem was her own lack of it, and for the first time, not in anger, not in defiance, but in a wave of genuine, gut-wrenching remorse, she whispered the words into the empty room that she should have said a week ago. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." Weeks turned into a month. I maintained my silence. A disciplined, unwavering quiet. I moved through my peaceful, orderly life. I reconnected with old friends. I took up painting again. I spent long, quiet afternoons reading by the lake. I was rediscovering the woman I was before I became a CEO. Before I became a mother, I was rediscovering Althea. I followed the dismantling of their old life through the clipped factual reports from my lawyer. Morgan had vacated the penthouse. My logistics team had efficiently liquidated the contents. The leases on the cars and the office had been terminated. Lance, I learned through a brief update, had moved in with a friend and was frantically trying to raise capital for some new dubious venture. He was gone from our lives, a footnote in a chapter that was now closed. Of Morgan I heard nothing. After leaving the apartment she had simply vanished. She didn't try to contact me through my lawyers. She didn't show up at the gate. There was only silence. A part of me, the old motherly part, felt a flicker of worry. Was she safe? Was she okay? But the new, wiser part of me knew that this silence was necessary. This was her journey now. I had given her a map, but she had to walk the path alone. My real 60th birthday celebration took place a month after the actual date. It was not a grand affair. It was an intimate dinner party at my home for a dozen of my closest friends. The people who had known me for decades, who had seen me through triumphs and tragedies. There was jazz music playing softly, good wine, and even better conversation. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of uncomplicated joy. As we were finishing dessert, my housekeeper Maria approached me, a single simple cream-colored envelope in her hand. "Dr. Grant," she said quietly, "this arrived in the mail today, by regular post." My heart gave a small quiet jolt. It was not from a law firm. It was not a bill. The address was handwritten. the script elegant and familiar. It was Morgan's. I excused myself from the table and walked into my quiet office, the envelope feeling heavy and significant in my hand. I sat at my desk and, with a strange sense of trepidation, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of simple, unadorned stationery. The letter was not long. It was not a plea for money or a negotiation of terms. It was something else entirely. Mom, it began. I don't know if you'll even read this. I know the rules you set out, but I couldn't go another day without saying this. There are no excuses for how I behaved. For the text, for my silence on your birthday, for all the years I took your love and your support for granted. It was cruel, and it was wrong, and I am so sorry. I've been staying with a friend from college. I got a job. It's not glamorous, I'm a hostess at a restaurant. I take reservations, I seat people, I get paid by the hour. My hands hurt at the end of the night. But it's mine. It's the first thing in my adult life that is truly mine. I've also made an appointment with the therapist your lawyer recommended. My first session is next week. I know that's part of the deal, but I want you to know I'm not doing it to get back the money. I'm doing it because I need to figure out how I became the person who could hurt you like that. The last lines were what made a single hot tear finally trace a path down my cheek. I'm not asking for you to fix this. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say that I am so sorry I forgot who you are. I think I forgot who I am too. And for the first time I think I'm ready to find out. Happy belated 60th birthday, Mom. Love, Morgan. I folded the letter and held it to my chest. It was not a solution, it was not a happy ending, but it was a beginning, a real one, a fragile, uncertain but deeply authentic beginning. The path to reconciliation would be long. It would be on my terms, but for the first time my daughter was not asking for a handout. She was taking the first difficult and necessary step onto a path of her own making. I looked out the window at the moonlit lake. The silence of the house no longer felt like an absence. It felt like an opportunity, a clean slate, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a flicker of genuine unburdened hope. The end. Thank you for watching.